Hello everyone, I'm your host on this channel. We'll be delving into the epic of Karam. A story of self-exploration, strength, and choice now. Let's begin today's adventure, and step into the fantastical world of Karam. Stretching life. With the directions of another student. They had finally made their way to the third star's training. The space spanned over 3 football fields within the walls of the academy. Groups were spread out from one another, lifting things and working out. There were maybe a dozen groups in all, making for little over 100 students. So, what do I do? Karam looked to Dolph for guidance, as she always did. They begin making groups as a teacher appears around the edges. Each one of the 5 sides teach something different. For instance, arms or legs or back strength. A teacher will come out and begin to wait for 10 students at one of the 5 sides that they specialize in. So I should just start walking until I find a teacher. Surrounding the field was an overhang that split outside from inside along these paths. Teachers will gather students. Karam and Dolph began walking around now to find someone to train within the shade of the overhang. 10 minutes passed before they came across anyone. Hello, are you a teacher for the 3 stars? The man looked up from his book. I am. Can I be the first in your class today? Karam smiled politely at the tall man on the floor. He nodded. He held back up his book in front of his face and began again to read. Karam, aware that she was being pushed away, began to talk with Dolph about the classes. Think I should start my stretching now, or do you think he will give us time for that? I have never heard of anyone doing what you do. In most classes they jump right into it before even learning the students' names. This is because after a class is over they are not likely to see the same student again. While they have that many instructors here. Karam sat on the floor and pulled one leg over the other in a gluteal and lumbar rotation stretch. How many instructors do you think are necessary? 19. 20. Karam sticked her legs. 20 students to one teacher. The teachers would take 1 year and teach his or her students what he was shown to teach in that year to that fixed set of students. Then after that year was up, if the student passed, they would go on to the next year with a new teacher and learn more advanced things. Usually a school has a few thousand students and one teacher for every 20 or 30 students. She sighed and let go of her leg before proceeding to her next pose. And you said the students went there every day. How long did one stay at school? Dolph had found himself a comfortable position against the wall. From 5 to 18, about 8 hours. With about 8 to 6 classes in that time. Studying that often, that seems excessive, and yet. I'm sure 1920. You did something similar when you were learning. Didn't you? Dolph became quiet for a time. Can you read minds? Karam looked up at him. That would be silly. I don't know if it's you then. I'm not that out of this world. The two paused and looked at each other for a moment. Bad choice of words, yes. But I understand what you were attempting to convey. Karam returned to her stretches in silence. The teacher, who had been listening in on the conversation, peeked over his book, which was being held upside down to the young boy. It was rare for anyone to stop at him and accept his training when he read a book. Yet this child didn't seem to be bothered by it. Not only that, but he was interested in the knowledge he possessed. This teacher was different from others in the way that he held knowledge at a different height that other formers did. Child, what is your name? Karam looked upside down through her legs at the instructor. Me, I'm Kanishino Anatras 4 star. She straightened up and held her hand out to the teacher. Nice to meet you. The teacher glanced at the smiling Dolph before taking her hand. I'm Abdul Malik Lo Shin. What was that you were doing just now? He released his hand and pointed to the space she had recently occupied. I think that one was called Downward Dog. Oh. You mean stretching? If you stretch your muscles before you work out, it lessens the chance of cramps. When Abdul Malik didn't seem to understand, she elaborated. I really regret not taking that anatomy class. She muttered to herself for a moment. I'm not entirely sure. But this is what I think: muscles get warm when they are used. When warming them up before you work them, you are less likely to get them too hot to fast and hurt yourself. A cool down period is also important. Wow. You easily found the solution to the problem I have been researching. Really, what problem? Castaways. When there was no explanation, Karam looked to Dolph. Castaways are those whose injuries can't be explained by the usual methods. Pain that comes on suddenly and without warning or reason, because it will likely happen again. They are put to work with the spiritualists and lose their place in society. But those are just cramps, right? If you rest for a little while, they will go away next time. Oh, I see, because you guys don't know about stretching. Karam moved back to Dolph, forgetting about her conversation with her teacher. Forget making the third or fifth. We should make stretching a common knowledge. We could give most of them back their titles. They wouldn't have to wallow in self-hate anymore. We should bring this up to grandfather immediately. When is the soonest we can return? Bracken could leave tomorrow. But I'm afraid of how your father might react if we take you back any sooner than planned. Oh, that's true. All right. We'll explain the situation to Bracken. Would it be better to write it out? She doesn't like to talk to people she doesn't know. We should also tell him about the muscle thing we were talking about earlier. Maybe Grandpa will be able to set something up for these castaways and do something about the stars. Dolph nodded, relieved that she wasn't pushing her return. Also that the young princess looked so determined about something. It had been a long time since he had seen her so excited about doing something. Kanishino, if I agree to one-on-one lessons with you, would you tell me more about this stretching of yours? Karam turned around to the forgotten Abdul Malik. I really don't know much more about it than I have already told you, though. I'm not sure how greatly you would benefit. Then how about you show me more of those poses you were doing? In return, I'm sure I can get you to pass your third star in 5 weeks. Malik held up 5 fingers with confidence. 5 weeks. Karam's eyebrows jumped onto her forehead. Malik's smile widened. Sure, he had her. Primetime life. I was hoping to do it in 2. Karam glanced at Dolph. Malik stared at her, hands still in the air. Who? Can I see your identification? Karam reached into the back pocket of her custom-made pants and handed him the paper. His eyes grew large as he looked over it. 4 star at 5 years. What manner of person are you? Even if you are the child of a Shin, this is unheard of. His book slipped off his lap as he continued to stare at the numbers, making sure he had read it incorrectly. Karam scratched her cheek, embarrassed. I'm a bit of a genius. A bit is an understatement. Malik rubbed his eyes and looked over it again. After a moment he seemed to regain his senses. You've mastered the techniques. Yet not the 3rd star. He glanced at the child's small and frail body. It might be better if you worked on the 6th star first. Though it's a bit against protocol. It would at least allow you to grow up some more. Maybe they will allow it. Oh, in that case there is no need. I'm hoping not to be here longer than Karam glanced at Dolph and covered her mouth. I forgot. Sorry. Dolph laughed. And here I thought you were doing it on purpose. Dolph shrugged. What kind of former reads a book? Maybe he's the perfect teacher for you. I almost feel like you're insulting me. Dolph shrugged again. What kind of former wants to be a spiritualist? It's unheard of, though. You seem to have a lot of that. Dolph smirked at her, his words full of meaning. Karam replied with a slightly helpless expression. A spiritualist? Malik was deep in thought after hearing yet another crazy conversation. He held his chin in his hand as he thought. 2 weeks. Malik snapped his head up to Karam. All right, let's see what you are capable of. Malik turned and began walking into the field. Book and paper in hand. Wait. Don't we have to wait for the rest of the class? Malik turned back innocently. You think someone would actually want to be taught by someone who reads for fun? He held up the book and smiled at her. He turned back around and kept walking. For an old man, he sure is a strange one. Dolph shook his head as they began to follow him. Old, he's only like 30. That's the prime of one's life. Dolph looked down at her doubtfully. All right. It's a lie, but that doesn't mean he's old. He only seems that way because your life is only beginning. Karam scolded Dolph. Dolph's eyebrows rose. Sometimes I actually believe you're twice my age. Shut up, I'm not that old anyway. We are falling behind. Karam paused and looked up at her friend. Dolph sighed and pulled her onto an arm. Yes. Your Majesty, shut up, you're in a bad mood. I'm. So what? Deal with it. Oh no. I wasn't planning to deal. I was instead planning to enjoy. Karam snorted at him. Fancy words for someone who can't catch himself. A girl. Dolph raised an eyebrow. I'm not sure what you mean by that. You know. Hook up? No, and get into a relationship. Karam was beginning to think that Dolph was pure and innocent when he laughed. AHIC. Is it normal in your world for males to go after females? Does he mean that females go after males, or that males often are found with other males? Explain this to me. Karam's face was unreadable. Well, relationships aren't seen as something specific to one from each gender. So I was a little confused. You mean I could see some real-life boy love action? Karam's eyes sparkled with a hint of madness, as she then turned towards Dolph. Hey Dolph, no, but not doing it. You don't even know. Never. Whatever it is, no. I will not participate as a victim in any of your troublemaking. Or but Dolly, it would make me super happy. She whined at him. Dolph shook his head, not daring to look at her. Dolly. Be my play toy for a day. Dolly. Hey. Karam pulled on his shirt collar and shook it back and forth as she spoke. Kara. Dolph spoke with seriousness that shut even the pushy princess up. We are here. Karam looked around to find that Malik had claimed a large area that wasn't being used. Karam immediately turned back and continued whining. Dolly, give me a little happiness. Be a man and show me some love. I wanna see some real-life BL Pulies. Seeing as Dolph wasn't responding, she let go of his collar and dropped from his arms, landing carefully so as to not hurt herself. What's first, Sensei? Malik, a bit stuck on the words be a man and show me some love, shook his head of crazy thoughts and returned Karam's smile. First, young life. His lesson proceed at an astonishing rate. An astonishingly slow rate. Karam's body was far too young to be able to pick up 50-pound stones, or toss 10 pounds over a shoulder and run a mile. There is no way you are finishing this in 2 weeks. Malik laid down on the grass and pulled out his book. It's not a matter of will or hard work. Your body is simply unable to undertake this stress without breaking. Well, then why was I sent here if it wasn't expected of me in the first place? Karam, panting, turned to look at Dolph for an answer. Prin Kanishino. Normally students will live here for years before they are able to graduate. In fact, not many do graduate from here. Their lessons are tougher than other schools to become a Mao. I'm certain your father simply didn't expect you to excel so quickly. But you said you thought I could be out of here in months. Yes. And if you were 2 years older, I'm sure you could be out of here in weeks. But you're going to have to build up your body first. That no matter what world you're in, takes a while. By now Karam was practically red in the face. I think this body of mine is a nuisance. Why didn't that that stupid father of mine wait until I was 10? Dolph thought about it, ignoring her anger. I think that was because he doesn't want to feel he's held back the life of such a promising young. Oh fork that Karam kicked a boulder my her feet. Fork, what's the training for stars 6 and 7? I'll do those ones first. 6th star is fighting a rabid dog. So I don't think that one will be any problems, but the 7th can only be done after all the other stars have been collected. Why does an outsider know so much about the inner workings of our school? Mr. Malik looked up from his book to glare at Dolph with searing suspicion. In truth, Dolph's guardian had helped with the makings of this academy. As his guardian is a figure in high society. He was one of the people who had been tasked with finding tasks for the children that would be both challenging and difficult enough that it would give them a boost in their training to become a Brin. Dolph's guardian, believing in Dolph's abilities, had shared the plans for the academy and had even taken into account a number of his suggestions. In fact, Dolph had worked together with his guardian to come up with the 7th star. Though Dolph was unable to relay this fact to anyone who was unaware of his strength, because at the time he was still a young child. It would look odd if he were to say that he had helped out with the project, because it would suggest a higher position than he was willing to allow anyone to believe he had. Luckily, Karam caught wind of his uneasiness and stepped in. As you know, my father had a high position. He received some tips. Karam filled the word with hidden meaning. But he has a loose mouth, she motioned to Dolph. Especially to those nearest him. Dolph, who was both unable to come clean and familiar with her ways, played along. Sir Kanishino, you should not imply that your father has done dirty deeds to gain insight and get you ahead of the rest. Karam shrugged. Well, isn't it true though? Otherwise I never would have. Karam paused and glanced at the teacher, pretending that it wasn't her lack of knowledge, but instead a secret that kept her from continuing. Anyway, sensei, have any ideas for my 3rd star? With a hit to Malik's abilities, Karam has successfully changed the subject and blasted the previous conversation from his mind. Malik's confidence flew through the roof as he stood and put a hand on his hip. Actually, yes. I think that I might be able to pass you if I can create a formula to use your body mass to create new weight restrictions. This way, you'll be lifting closer to 10 pounds instead of 50. Malik made a pose, showing to the other two how proud of himself he was. What is a formula? Dolph, who had never been taught mathematics, looked on in a confused fashion while Malik and Karam ignored him. Are you going to use a body mass index or previously recorded data? That's the problem. Everything about you is smaller. I cannot simply weight a full-grown man. Ask how much we weights, and then divide and switch it for your own. It would simply be creating a smaller man. It would imply that you have had the same amount of training as that man. Right? You have to take time into account as well as age, muscle and size. Therefore, I have a formula that might work. Dolph tuned out as the two talked. He was a man with a muscle for a brain who rarely understood Karam whenever she began speaking to herself. So he assumed it would only be that much harder when there were two smart minds at work. Instead, he began observing the other students as they trained. As he observed, he noticed large characters on the walls of the building. If he hadn't recognized them, he would have only seen them as scratches on an old building. But as he looked closer, he noticed similarities to the characters that Karam often wrote. In fact, Karam had been teaching him about her language for some time now. Hey Kara, isn't that? In his shock, he had forgotten about names. Karam had heard his calm voice all too clearly over Malik's questions, and turned her gaze to where his lead her. There on the wall of the building was Japanese, a language that should have belonged to her alone on this planet. Oh my! Karam covered her mouth as shivers ran up and down her spine. The reason for her shocked-to-tears reaction wasn't simply because it implied she wasn't the only one, but instead because of what the words said that made her tremble. Dolph! The princess's knees gave out beneath her as she called for his emotional support. Dolph hurried over to her and embraced her, still unaware of the meanings behind the characters. Dolph. Karam shakily turned her head towards him. "I have to die suicide life," Karam cried as she clung to Dolph. Her good friend of 4 years pleased Dolph. "You don't understand." The young princess shook his collar aggressively as she spoke. "You have to kill me. If you don't want this world to end, this planet to go up in flames, you must kill me." Karam shook with sobs as she let go of him and curled into his lap, covering her head. This was a shock that even she could not overcome. Not as she had overcome her second birth. "Please Dolph, I'm begging you, let me die." Her drama had pulled the attention of the two groups that surrounded them. Whispers started up between the students as they stared. "Kara! What are you talking about? I can't." Dolph was utterly distraught. He had never seen the princess in such despair before, and it pained him to see her in such a state. Even more so that she would accept death after simply glancing a few words from her own world. Was it really so horrible that there was somebody else from her world? If anything, should it not be a reason to celebrate? He had no idea what had given her such thoughts. Dolph held the small girl in his arms with a face that expressed how utterly useless he was in such a situation. Dolph was unable to move Rose say a word due to fear of breaking her. After that, Karam fell back into a depressive state. Not only did she refuse classes, but also food. Intending to die, she refused to even eat. She was a doll with no will of her own. Karam had been in this state for 3 days. Dolph by her side the whole time. He hadn't given up on her yet. He still believed that she could be saved and returned to the cheery person she was before. Dolph held her up with one hand while with the other he took pieces of avocado off the plate and put it in her mouth. Before she was able to spit it out, he closed her lips and began chewing for her. She didn't even look at him. She fought against him. After moving her chin, for a while he held her nose, forcing her to swallow the small amount of food. As he did this, Dolph couldn't look at the princess either. His grey eyes avoided her blue ones, as if they would melt his if he dared glance at her. His brows had fallen lower than they had been in a long, leaving his face looking as if he had just been thrown out on the street. There was no way Karam could hold to her decision if she saw such a face. It was better for everyone if she left this planet as soon as possible. No matter what she did in the end, she would be apart from her new family. It was harsh to treat him as such, but she could not allow him to try and find another solution. Bracken, who held the plate of meticulously cut fruit, spoke up with a heavy heart. Dolph. He understood the meaning of her tone. She wanted him to give up. Dolph hung his head. Bracken, the young princess cannot travel in this condition. To travel to the castle would take far longer and far more care than we are able to give. I'm going out. I'll probably be gone for a few days. Keep the princess alive. Karam didn't even have the will left to cry at the space he had put between them anymore. It had been only 3 days. Yet her condition progressed quickly. Her previous attempts on her own life had left her less than in a state to be doing anything. Dolph stood abruptly and walked out of the room. Bracken watched him go. There was nothing she was able to do. Their cover was secret, so she could not send a letter through the school to the castle without fear of revealing themselves, and she was even less able to go there herself, as the princess was now left up to her. Bracken resigned herself to her fate and turned back to watch over the young princess. Detective life true to his word. Dolph did not return for several days. Instead, he dedicated himself to finding the one who had made the markings on the wall. Yes, I know of him. He was a popular topic for gossip about 7 years ago. He was known to be a little crazy. He was known as Marco because that was his main response to just about everything, and he did things that. Malik paused, slightly uncomfortable about talking ill of someone. That gave people the impression that he wasn't in his right mind. There was little anyone understood about him. Know anything that might help me find him? I know he liked to hang around in our central courtyard where stars 3 to 4 train. He hesitated slightly before changing the topic. What you called that boy? Dolph nodded his thanks and bolted, not even allowing him to finish thank you. I will check out the central courtyard on my own. Dolph walked around talking to other teachers that taught in the central courtyard for the next half of the day. Why, I know him, Marco, right? He talked to Badib a lot. The teacher motioned to a friend of hers, a tall woman teaching some students. Excuse me. I'm busy, excuse me. The woman turned back to one of her students and guided him in the correct way to lift a boulder 3 times his size. I'm sorry, it's a very important matter. He turned her around to face him. I need to know where I can find the boy who made that 7 years ago. Dolph pointed behind him at the lines on the walls of the academy. The teacher sighed. She could tell his strength was not ordinary. Even a hybrid like her might be crushed by him like a bug. He graduated. She tried to turn back. Where can I find him? He repeated the question and pulled on her shoulder. Badib sighed, slightly annoyed, trying to hide how much his grasp really hurt her. He went to Brim. I think his name on his identification was Harcase. Dolph briefly thanked the lady and turned to hurry away. Badib mumbled to herself about those with power and their cocky attitudes before turning back to her students. The Brim School was for anyone who had a Mao title and was younger than the age of 30. Of course, like Bree, it was only for those who could afford it. While becoming a Mao is open to all residents of the kingdom. Official stars and titles beyond that must be paid for beyond what the regular household has. Therefore, out of those who achieve the first title, less achieve the title of Brin. So for a crazy person to achieve something that even the majority of the kingdom is unable to do is highly unlikely unless there was a method to his madness. It wasn't difficult for Dolph to make an educated guess. At this point, the Brim Academy was 2 days' ride by carriage. Luckily, Dolph was faster than any horse. As he exited the Bree Academy, he didn't even hesitate to use the abilities he had hated for so long. He began his journey and was there by the time the second day awoke. He took a deep breath and calmed himself before he entered. He steeled himself to be treated as a trespasser and walked through the front doors. While Bree Academy exuded an aura of extravagance, Brim felt homely as he entered. 2 guards waiting at the door looked over at him. Their faint smiles told Dolph they had just been laughing at something. I must speak to a student of this academy. It is urgent. He looked upon the guards coldly with a glare that only one with a high title could procure. The guards, who were both mid-shari, froze and quickly allowed him to pass. Down the hallway, Dolph came upon a desk with 3 spiritualists. One of them looked over his glasses fearlessly at Dolph. One drooled a bit at Dolph's exposing shirt. And another shook in fright. Surely the shaky one had had a previously bad experience with another former. What business do you have in a place like this? Dione, the spiritualist in the green robes said as he eyed his torso. I seek an audience with one of your students about an urgent matter. His name is Harcase. At his overly polite and formal speech, even the frightened one began to look at him in a different light. Not many formers bothered with them. The one in glasses smiled and hurried off while the other 2 eyed him. It's urgent. One wiped drool from the corner of his mouth and waved Dolph's worries to the side. He will bring you the child. Though might I ask as to the purpose of your attitude? I have not seen many formers like you in all my days. He seemed impressed as he spoke and even dared bite his lip, as he looked Dolph up and down once more. Previously, Dolph might have acted like all the others. Though now that he had become friends with a smart former that saw the world differently, he enjoyed the company, as he tried looking at things from her perspective. Even though he was in a hurry, his training had toughened him up for any sort of stress, which was the only reason that, when he thought of her, he didn't take down the building down to find the only person in the world possible of giving a shred of insight into Karam's current state. Dolph smiled at first. It was a smile full of happiness. After a brief moment it fell into one of sadness, as he thought of recent events. I have a friend. He was only able to mutter a simple sentence before falling back into painful memories. No amount of training could prepare one for what he was going through. I see. The spiritualist didn't seem to notice his unease. I would very much like to meet the friend of a Dione that could turn him against his beliefs. Dolph looked at the no. He looked through the spiritualist. Dolph looked through him, as if he was not watching him, but instead a distant future. I hope you are able. 4 days ago, he would have smiled and replied that the spiritualist would be meeting her sooner than he thought. Though he hadn't the energy now. Dolph's head turned in the direction where glasses had disappeared to moments before as a boy came hopping down the hall towards them. He skipped with a smile on his face, as if he were playing a very interesting game. Are you the one who called me? He rested his elbow on the desk as he peered at Dolph. I only called for you if you were the one who made the markings on the wall of Bree Academy 7 years ago. Dolph spoke with an overwhelming indifference. Ishii Ayono. He then began speaking excitedly in a language Dolph faintly recognized as one Karam had spoken to him before. He snatched the boy's ear. Excuse me. I will return him when he is finished with his business. Even being roughly led by the ear, Hake's attitude was still carefree. Goodbye my good friends. I will come again in good time. I am off to talk with an old friend of mine. He smiled and waved goodbye to the 3 spiritualists. Normally, there would be several channels that would have been gone through before any student could be excused by anyone other than the child's own guard that had accompanied him. Though Hake's was a special case like Karam. Children are required several permissions to leave school grounds. Karam would require the permission of Dolph Bracken, at least one of the Bryn or Shari of the school, and her parents. Though the parents are also allowed to give someone at the school their permission to give permission in times of emergency. This was made possible because many of the parents live far enough away that by the permission slip is sent, signed, and returned, the problem or chance might have passed. This duty is often given to the child's guard. In Hake's case, he had no workers and his parents had given him permission to give himself permission on his behalf. Although this had never before been done, it was accepted because there were no rules against it. The last thing he required was permission from one of the workers of the school. He was already friends with the spiritualists, and as they already knew he was an unusual boy, they allowed him to leave without trouble. So Ishii was reborn as a man. I thought I was born ahead of you though. I will have to change that theory. Hake began mumbling to himself as he was carried by Dolph back towards Bree Academy. Deadly life. Dolph didn't even bother correcting him. To Dolph, Hake was a horrible person who had driven Karam to create her own hell. With Hake blabbering away, Dolph carried him like a sack of potatoes for hours until he made it into the princess's room. Dolph tossed him onto her bed. He pointed towards the princess. Fix her. Hake stopped talking long enough to glance at the emotionless boy staring at the wall. What, I'm not that kind of Hake, he laughed. Anyway, I was wondering what you thought about the Belgian theory. I mean, his third paragraph stated that the Belgian theory was an idea created by the people of Belgium around 2022 after the Civil War. Their ruler was a great man who was said to have had his fate chosen at the end of his past life. The idea soon flowered into an idea in England. A researcher began to understand it as part of their reincarnation culture, and came to believe that if a person died a certain way, it was possible to change where they were put in their next life. Karam's Haarcase had used this insight to give her many great things in her next life. The first was power, the second was beauty, and the third was an ability specific to the world. He gave her great things, because of one of the things she often scolded him about was how many of the stories the Haarcase studied were about reincarnated people rising up and becoming great pillars of their new world. Did you use a knife at the fourth stage? Karam's expression didn't change. Yes, I did. The Haarcase was confused about this because he should have been born before Ishii Ayono. And yet he believed that Dolph was Ishii. Those born into higher positions would be born less often, and because the Haarcase had given himself a lower position in this world, he should have been born before her. Yet Dolph was obviously older than him. Then there wasn't a problem with it. What are you? Haarcase looked up at Dolph, who was not likely to use such a small young voice. Haarcase glanced at Bracken before turning his head to the small girl on the bed. Ishii. Bracken covered her ears. Karam blinked. She had responded without thinking about it, but she now looked at who Dolph had brought. The boy was about 15. He had short, messy, dark brown hair and a small face. His eyes were almost black and he had Asian features, something Karam hadn't seen yet in this world. Karam's eyebrows drew together. Haarcase. She said the question in a monotone, still not having gained back her energy. Haarcase smiled stupidly and pointed to his face. I look the same, don't I? Karam struggled to sit up. She leaned up with her pillow between her and the wall. A little out of breath. No, you look cuter. How horrible. I was a cute child. Haarcase slipped into Japanese cute. The Haarcase I know is an idiotic, hard-headed man full of pride. Karam coughed. Even so. A small smile had risen on her face. Dolph exhaled and his shoulders fell. He felt as if he'd just seen Karam come back to herself from her time in hell. Haarcase stared at Karam. What? Fall in love with my child self? Karam chuckled lightly. What, it really is you? Of course it's me. Who else would correct your work for you? Haarcase just smiled. I'm relieved. He wiped slight, possibly imaginary tears from his eyes. It really was her with this. He could finish what he had come here to do. His carefree attitude cooled down a bit as he watched Karam sadly. I'm sorry about what I did. Karam laughed coldly before it turned into a coughing fit. She smiled and looked at Dolph. Would you hit this guy for me? With all your strength? Dolph, who had been watching the encounter seriously, as if he were ready to kill Haarcase if he moved so much as one hair to close towards Karam, or made her frightened any further. Dolph smiled and leaned towards the boy. Wait. I'll die if he does that. Aya. Dolph stopped just before hitting him. Oi. Karam's face was hidden, but her voice expressed a coldness that Haarcase hadn't yet known. This world's problems are your fault, aren't they? Karam looked up at him, though to Haarcase it looked like she was looking down on him. Why are you putting the blame on me? Oh, that. Well, I thought it would get your attention, so. Dolph's hand followed through. Although Dolph tried to hit him lightly, Haarcase still went flying. Dolph had been trained to hold back his strength, so it was likely that he gave in a little bit to the anger he was feeling. It was a cruel thing to do, but neither Dolph nor Karam felt guilty. Bracken, on the other hand, shivered and snuck out of the room. Hey, Dolph, you shouldn't crack your knuckles like that. Hitting him dead so soon after finally getting him here would be a shame. Karam chuckled darkly. She coughed a few times. Even though she was trying to ignore the pain she felt from the time she had jumped out the third-story window. He's a low grin. He should at least be able to take a few hits. The two, without batting an eyelash, fell back into their usual back and forth. Even a Shari might die from a few hits from you. Dolph laughed. Isn't that the point, princess? Karam laughed as well. You know me all too well. Dolly. The two laughed, or rather, Dolph laughed while Karam hacked while she smiled. Harcase, who had only heard the last part of the conversation because of the ringing in his ears, put his hands in front of him as if to shield himself. Why? Harcase coughed up some blood and a tooth. Wait, you can't be serious. I know it was my fault, but still. Harcase backed up against the already cracked wall behind him. How else was I going to be sure that she would come after me? I mean, I didn't have any other choice, did I? The two paused and changed their tone. Karam smiled like a lady and Dolph put down his hands as they faced each other. From a distance, one might think they were talking about insignificant things on a sunny day. Dolly, you said it wasn't illegal to kill here. That's right, Dolph smiled back at Karam. The Harcase stared at them. For a moment he was relieved. They were acting like a lady and lord at a tea party. If they were like that, then surely his life was no longer in danger. Then we won't get in trouble if we say, beat a boy to death. Karam put a broken finger gently to her chin and tipped her head to the side slightly. She looked the picture of a woman attempting to entrap a man with her wills. I'm sure we could come up with something after all. He really has no idea the troubles he's put us through. Has he? Dolph looked down on the Harcase, who was leaning up against the wall and holding his stomach. I think ending my life the first time was a pretty cruel thing to do. But trying to kill me again, that goes beyond cruel, don't you think? Karam cocked her head to the side gently. Dolph paused. Killing you in 2 lives. That's got to warrant a death on any world. Dolph's smile had become forced. Karam, who had noticed this slight change in her best friend, thought back on what she had said. Oops. I didn't tell you I had been murdered, did I? How convenient that it comes out now. Yes. Right when the culprit is within my reach. Dolph's eyes turned to Harcase, and a crazy look appeared in his eye. I've killed many people in my life, but I think this one will give me the most fulfillment. After all, nobody crosses a Dione. Dolph stepped towards the boy. After turning off his control, the simple action was enough to shake the land 3 stories down. By the time Karam had replied to his earlier words, he was already holding Harcase up by the scalp. Even though both Dolph and Karam knew they had little intention of hurting him, Dolph moved anyway. His love for Karam spurred him forward as if he were possessed. He had experienced hell. A hell that one could only be freed from if one's own self decided it must be so. Because he had experienced it firsthand, he knew that there was nothing he could say that would return her to her previous self. After all, this depression was a state of mind that the individual chooses. If Karam didn't choose it herself, then it wouldn't be as meaningful as if she had done it herself. All this time, he had felt useless even though he was always by her side. He thought he knew everything about her, but for her to cut herself off from the world and for him to have no way to reach her heart was absolutely terrifying. That may be true, but what I've done in this life is of my own free will. Therefore, he shouldn't be charged with a double murder. Karam coughed before continuing, causing Dolph to pause in crushing the boy to death. He will have to die anyway for the sake of this world. Let's at least use him. Karam cleared her throat. Invasion life. If Karam could use his presence as proof for what she says about her world, he might be useful. She could also run by him stretches and other things that she might be able to use to help this planet. Use? Dolph looked back at Karam, who was holding her side. He's more knowledgeable than me about certain things. He could probably help come up with more stretches. Why should I allow a thing like this to help with something like that? Dolph's face darkened as he held the still screaming Haarcase by the crown. He was the one who found out how to make me reincarnate. After all. Karam shrugged with a face that showed slight helplessness. He's the reason I was able to come to this world, and I spent a lot of time with him in my past life with him. Please don't call him like that. Dolph paused for a moment. Everyone in the room watched his reaction slowly. His eyebrows moved nearer one another when he spoke. His voice was low and quiet. He also tossed you into hell several times. Do you feel no hate for a man who thinks of nothing other than himself? Karam looked at her hands. Dolph reluctantly dropped Haarcase. All right. I'll follow your lead. You are the master in this relationship, I suppose. Dolph walked over to Karam's bedside and sat in the wooden chair he had been using a few days earlier. While Karam couldn't help but be amazed. Even Dolph can sulk her master anyway. We have bigger problems. Haarcase got up off the floor while holding his head. Karam looked over at the Haarcase doubtful. What could be more important than the oncoming of an entire world? Ishi. You know that idea you were researching about the spirit world's door? Karam thought for a moment what? Her eyes grew large, and her urgent tone snapped Dolph back into reality. Dolph unfolded his arms and turned back towards the pair. Haarcase, you don't mean Haarcase nodded solemnly. Apparently we've reached the stretching limit. I've already met two people myself. A cancer girl from England and a tribal chief from Africa. Karam began reaching at strings. What if it's normal for this world, I mean? It might not be our fault. Haarcase shook his head. Both of them were younger than my current vessel and from the same year. His head drooped lower. Same month, even what? What is this? Dolph looked from one to the other and back again and again as they spoke. No way, Kara, what? Oh right, I should explain. My theory was about the spiritual world. This much you understand, right? Dolph nodded his head. You explained to me once about your spirit having come to this world. Karam nodded right. My theory was that the more souls pushed through, the looser it becomes. In other words, by killing me and himself and forcing our souls through the hole in the veil that allowed us to keep our memories. Sensei has opened that pathway for others. The problem is that they are coming too fast. According to the crap, I don't know that word. Karam looked over at the Haarcase statistics. Statistics, yes. According to those, someone dies every 3 seconds. Or maybe it was 11. She glanced at Haarcase, but didn't seem to care about the answer and waved it away. Anyway, point is that we have a lot of people dying on my old planet. But if Sensei has met two people from around the world that have both dying within the same month, then it is likely that more will come at a pace that will quickly jump to 1 month for the next, 16 the month after that. The problem is that we are not sure about the exchange of souls. So either your planet is being invaded by Earthlings, or souls that were going to come here in the first place are simply retaining memories of their past life. Why is invading a problem? Karam couldn't help but facepalm herself. Obviously you have never seen Rise of the Planet of the Apes. Haarcase chuckled. I doubt that would have much of an effect in this situation. Karam furrowed her brow before sighing loudly. I fear you may be correct about that. This was a line that Ishi used often in her past life. It slightly shocked her Haarcase for him. It was normal not to bring one world into the other, as he hadn't ever known the same person during multiple lives. He had decided early on in the beginning of his second life. It was similar to his own unspoken rule, that he had assumed everyone else would walk by as well simply because it seemed so obvious to him. Harcase looked uncomfortable as the conversation continued. If we keep coming to this world, we may be pushing away those who should have been born here in the first place. Christians believe. Karam paused. Excuse me, I mean one of the religions on my old planet believes that there are many souls and Earth is similar to a test to see if they can live on in the spirit world. I'm not so clear on the details actually. I was never interested in religion. Understanding washed over Dolph's face in the middle of her explanation. Karam wasn't sure what he understood. But he seemed clear on the fact that it was a problem. Anyways, she stared at Dolph for a second. Does he really get it? There is the possibility of a backlash. Or the end of this world because of the Belgian theory. Or Earthlings will overrun this planet. Yes. I can see why that would be a problem. Things that were never meant to be there will force the circle out of order. The knowledge they have might have a catastrophic effect on the way our planet works. As well. Karam nodded. As if she had expected him to see it so clearly despite her earlier doubt. I thought all formers were blockheads. The Harcase couldn't help but stare. Dolph answered offhandedly before turning back to Karam. That's because you are always hanging out with the spiritualists. What can we do to close this spirit door? Karam and Harcase got quiet and looked away. Dolph looked back and forth between the two and wondered what he has said to pull their moods down. Well, you know, yeah, it's not the best idea. And there is no way to confirm before or after. The risk is simply too large. Harcase and Karam looked at each other sadly. It was almost as if they were offering condolences to each other. After a second of magical eye communication, they both looked away again and heavily sighed. No matter what, these two were close in their past life. Though there was no way their understanding of each other reached like Dolph's and Karam's. Dolph watched Karam carefully. He sat back in his chair and folded his arms. You have to die. Karam didn't look at him. That's one theory, but you believe it. Theoretically. We can clog the gap if we do enough souls at once. Of course, after WW2 that idea kind of. We are finding another way. Dolph said this with resolution in his tone. What? It was unbelievable for them to come up with another idea. After all, years of research have brought them to their current point. Not only that, but in this world there weren't resources like there had been on Earth. Karam couldn't help but entertain the idea that formers were thoughtless people. Dolph looked over at Karam seriously. I'm not going to let you die for some stupid theory. Dolph's attitude left Karam red in the cheeks. Anyway, we don't even have souls. Us forms are made of earth and air. So even if Earthlings do take over, there is little problem. In the end, Dolph sighed and shrugged. Returning to his less serious self. We will simply explode, the both of us, will we not? That's an actual problem. Dolph stood up and put a finger to her lips to shush her. You forget, my young princess. This is a world of magic. We can do practically everything. One eyebrow up. He looked like quite the mysterious troublemaker. Karam smiled and nodded. She thanked the heavens, the gods, and even Harcase that she was led to meeting this man. If their story of how the world began was true, and the humans on this planet were made of earth and air, then would blowing up be such a bad thing? Those from her planet have already lived their lives, so if they were to go up in flames, no. By this train of thought could lead her to killing someone. Karam had considered what life was, and if it was worth it before, as she had gone into depression several times. But she felt as if her true answer to her questions were close at hand. Karam, for the first time since seeing the Japanese on the wall, laughed Harcase. Do you have any spirit? Dolph turned back to being serious. It was an odd sight, with his hands still on his hips, as if he were an evil queen. Harcase paused, taking in the sudden change, and shook his head no. Why? Dolph nodded as if it was Ash had expected. All right then, princess. I'm sorry, but we are going to have to go against Jazz's wishes for a time. I would like to talk to a specialist about this. Specialist Karam poked for information, but was given nothing in return. As soon as you are better, he will head off. I will inform Bracken. Would you like me to bring you anything? Karam paused for a moment. Fruits. The top 3 sweet ones I like. Karam's face widened as a smile stretched across her face. Dolph smiled, his regular mood returning. Yes. Right away, of course. He knew exactly what those fruits were, having cared for her for so long. Before leaving, Dolph stared at her for a second. Karam smiled bitterly at him and shrugged her arms. Dolph nodded reluctantly. The exchange was simple. Dolph was wondering what he should do about the Harcase, but Karam shrugged, letting him know there was little to do after all. He harbored no ill intent towards her, so leaving her alone with him would likely bring no harm to her. But there was no way they could kick him out unsupervised, and he couldn't very well go with Dolph to the restricted areas. Dolph gave up as he knew Karam knew him best, but still did so unwillingly. Both of them understood this and moved accordingly. Jazz. Harcase felt as if there was something wrong with their conversation. Wait! Princess Harcase stood up and yelled suddenly. Heartless life. Dolph was already walking out the door, and ignored his sudden outburst as he took his leave. Yes, you are the one who set me in a high position. Why are you surprised? Well, after learning about the world, I figured you might be the child of a Midshari. But I didn't expect it to go anywhere past that. In the first place, its depth. Harcase paused. He was speaking about the way in which he had ruthlessly killed her. There was a certain cut to the heart that would have an impact to the soul. It could trick the soul into reading the experience in such a way that the next life given would be rewarded by a higher position. This was one of the theories off of the beliefs of the pharaohs. But at this point, Harcase paused the talk of the gory and touchy subject and made his point in a roundabout way. I made it so you would be given a certain high position. But it shouldn't be that high. That idea makes the soul read their past life as either good or bad. Correct? It's possible that I simply had enough that it gave me a higher position. Yes, you are correct. It damages the heart, which is connected directly to the soul. Because harsh lives both mentally and physically, put stress on the body. It is shown in the heart like the ear rings of a tree. Therefore, by attacking your heart first, I should have been able to allow your life to have been read as worse than it was. By doing this, the universe would seek its balance to be retained by giving you a better position of certain talents that would make your next life easier. But Karam had already considered this better than anyone, even not being conscious when the Harcase sliced her up. She knew most of what he must have done to get her here, because she already knew his thoughts. It was a simple task from there to determine what change there might have been due to her previous life, and if they had affected her at all. Or further yet, any mistaken theories and accidents during the process. Or even things which they hadn't yet even considered. There are certain levels. I didn't piece the second valve. Which means to get a position of such high authority, you must have led a life with more tragedies than the average person. At this point, Karam understood where this was going. She was quiet as he worked his way through it. She closed her eyes and laid back carefully, listening as he continued. She wanted to know how far her past life experiences would allow her to rise now. Wait, just how much higher is it? Princesses of this kingdom. Harcase looked over at Karam, the new hope. Karam's name wasn't well known to the public, but her importance and stature was clear to anyone. Her appearance was probably world news. Harkay's eyes were large as he stared at her. Right after a war in a time of peace. With two legendary parents. Said to be taught at young by the king's right hand. Beauty and physical prowess and... I don't even know the full extent of your life. Just what kind of hell have you gone through? Karam smiled slightly. Though she didn't respond with words. It was telling enough. He found his mistake in her place in society. According to a certain theory they had researched. The heart is connected to the soul. According to a certain religion, one's next life is determined by what they'd gone through in their past life. Therefore, if one were to be given a bad life right off the bat, and try to make their way out of it, they would be rewarded and be given a better life in their next reincarnation. Considering these two are facts, the life that Ishii must have had on Earth must have been extraordinarily terrible. Bracken, who had entered shortly after Dolph had left to keep an eye on the stranger, twitched. She wasn't comprehending the entire story, but she had just heard his explanation, and was able to at least understand that the great things she had were due to unspeakable horrors the princess had gone through. Does a single cut mean that much? Karam spoke almost as if it had nothing to do with her. Harkay was shell-shocked at how calm she was. The heart has a direct connection to the soul. A slight bruising at the time of death could allow great physical traits in their next life. Because it had a direct effect on the heart. It wouldn't simply be above average, but superhuman. Of course, that's if you follow the proper procedure. Harkay thought back about the process. He had killed her for the 20 millionth time in his 2 lives, but he could find no mistake of his process in his memory. But if it was true, it would make sense as to why Karam had fallen so readily into depression. This is simply a theory, isn't it? But there are so few royals in this world. Your life would have had to have been as hard, as royalty is rare, and even the new Harkay. Karam stopped him with a stern tone that didn't match her age. Bracken shivered. I can't say I've had a hard life. I've never starved, always had someone who loved me. I had proper education, friends and family. I can only assume either your calculations or the theory is incorrect. She didn't seem to be lying. Yet Harkay had a hard time believing her. Other than the stretching of the spiritual hole, everything else has already proved itself to move just as he had thought it would. Yet to make such a mistake on his first test subject. It was almost unthinkable for him to do himself. Despite this, he agreed. Karam had always been happy in her past life. There was no reason to doubt her. All right. I understand. I will adjust my theory. Harkay fell back onto his bottom and wiped again at the blood at his lip. Harkay had had vast experiences with Karam in the past. It was rare for one of her ideas to be proven incorrect. Harkay had tried and failed many times to prove her wrong. In the end, it was always her win. Therefore, he gave in easier than he would with anyone else. Because he trusted her. He didn't know that this lie of hers would mark the beginning of a whole new Ishii. Karam's story is far from over. We will continue to bring you more exciting content. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and join us in uncovering every mysterious veil. Until the next video, may magic be with you.